As a 28-year-old woman, this narrative has been simmering in my life, but I only now understood how far it really goes. For background, my older sister Emily, 30F, has been the golden kid from day one. I have always been the black sheep of my family. Growing up, Emily could do nothing wrong. I still clearly recall sitting through countless praising sessions while my mother, 54F, would flaunt Emily's accomplishments, utterly discounting all I did. Whatever Emily had accomplished that week usually dominated even if I had something interesting to tell. Looking back, the symptoms were clear-cut early on, but it's amazing how blind you may be when it's your own family. While Emily had everything thrown to her on a silver platter, I took part-time jobs to accumulate money for college during high school. My mother even created a separate savings account for Emily's future, but she would dismiss my request to do the same for me, saying I should learn to be more independent. I simply felt at the time Mom was attempting to teach me responsibility, or was being austere. What was really going on behind the scenes eluded me. I battled money after high school. Unlike Emily, I lacked parental support. Hence, I had to borrow money for education. After paying for Emily's grad school and assisting her with a down payment on her first property, my mother said they cannot afford it. Finding out about the down payment made me feel like a hit to the gut. I recall that sinking sensation in my stomach. While I was just scraping by, working part-time jobs to pay tuition and rent, my sister received everything handed to her. Things started to seem good only a few years ago, when I acquired a well-paying job. Driven to buy my own house and break free from the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck, I worked hard and saved aggressively. That's when I observed my mother's conduct change. She started asking a lot of questions about my work, pay, and money, suddenly quite fascinated in my life. Though in retrospect it was obvious she had an ulterior goal, at first I assumed she was simply being encouraging. A few months after landing the job, my mother advised I temporarily return home in order to cut expenses. I hesitated. I had not lived at home in years and loved my freedom. She argued, though, that she wanted to help me get ahead and that it was out of love. She sounded as if the wise financial choice was hers. Reluctantly, I accepted, believing it would only be temporary and would really enable me to save more quickly. Things became weird as soon as I returned. My mother began commenting passively-aggressively about my spending. She would say things like, "You should be saving that money for your future," or, "I hope you're not wasting all your hard-earned money," if I ordered takeout or treated myself to something modest. It was irritating, but I tried to ignore her since she seemed to be just being too careful. Emily then began routinely showing up at the house. She always kept her distance, so it seemed strange that she seemed to be always around, like she was monitoring me. She began hinting that our mother was concerned about my being too independent, and that I should exercise more financial caution. My mother delivered a bombshell one day. She drew me aside to inform me Emily was struggling financially. Her extravagant way of living apparently caught up with her, and she needed assistance paying her obligations. My mother simply expected me to co-sign a loan for Emily. She never asked. The arrogance of that stunned me. Here I was, saving every dollar to at last catch up, and they wanted me to gamble my financial future for the faults of my sister. All hell erupted as I turned down, yelling about how families should support one another. My mother called me selfish and unappreciative. Of course, Emily began to scream, play the victim card, and bolt, claiming I seldom gave family any thought. The disagreement was fierce, and that evening I felt more alone than ever when leaving the house. Something about the whole circumstances bothered me. It was more than simply the loan request. It was how fast they both turned on me, almost as though they had always known this. Just to be safe, I began poring over my financial situation. That's when I discovered something that caused my blood to stop. A tiny loan taken out in my name years ago, one I never remembered ever asking for. The next day I questioned my mother about it, but instead of answering, she entered straight into gaslighting mode. She said I was acting theatrically, and I must have forgotten about it. That instant I understood this was more than simply a loan. When I told my pals what happened, they were incensed. Insisting I should protect myself, they advised me to seek legal counsel. I grudgingly set up a legal consultation. Glancing at the loan paperwork, he verified what I had feared, that it was fraud. To discover whether there were any more shocks, he advised I perform a comprehensive credit check right away. My heart dropped when I did. Stretching back almost a decade, I had never opened any of the several accounts or loans. That's when it dawned on me. My mother had been undermining my advancement every time I started to catch up for years using my identity. This was about control, not family or love. Then I knew I had to face her one final time before deciding what to do next. It wouldn't be nice. Knowing I had to face my mother after discovering the bogus loans in my name, driven to acquire responses, I headed back to the house. The place was quiet when I got there. Sitting at the kitchen table, my mother was surfing on her phone as though every day were just like another. I took out the stack of credit records, loan statements, and everything I had discovered printed. I arranged them in front of her. She first hardly looked at them. She leaned in then, eyes narrowing to identify what they were. Her look changed as if she was trying to figure out how to play this. She grabbed one of the remarks, slanted her head, then turned it back to me. "You must have overlooked these," she remarked. "You most certainly opened these accounts years ago, and simply don't remember." I noted the signature marks. Her handwriting owned them. They were not mine. I showed her the dates, many of which came from my barely making ends meet years when still in college. She dismissed it, telling me I was acting hysterically, errantly, and paranoid. She insisted I was exaggerating, and that perhaps my confusion about my own finances explained it. Nevertheless, I wasn't perplexed. In my life, I had never been more definite. Emily shot through the main door right then. Her phone was in her hand, and she appeared to have been non-stop messaging someone. She marched across without stopping, glanced at the papers on the table, and rolled her eyes. She snipped, "What are you doing to Mom?" "This is ridiculous. You always create stories to get attention. You're just jealous since I've been more successful." It startled me. Emily showed no even curiosity in learning the truth. She seemed to have her mind already formed. She was in on it, or at least ready to defend our mother no matter what. I understood then. Sensing her first strategy failing, my mother abruptly changed direction. Her eyes welled with tears, and she adopted a most somber, sorrowful glance. She clasped my hand hard. She stated she was sorry, that she just acted out of concern for me. She wanted to instill accountability, as she claimed she had seen me struggling financially. She sounded as though she was doing me a favor, as if all of this were for my own benefit. I drew my hand away to tell her it was too late for apologies. I said straightforwardly, "I intended to file a lawsuit. I have to guard my future and credit." Her expression when I stated that resembled what I had done, that of a smack. Her false tears dried up right away. Then she stared coldly and angrily. She just bolted from the room without saying another word. My phone was exploding an hour later. Texting me, aunts, uncles, and cousins all accused me of being unappreciative and callous. They claimed I was separating the family and acting cruelly, even considering legal action against my own mother. Clearly, they had all heard a rather different story, most likely fabricated by Emily and my mother. Nobody wanted to hear me try to explain what was actually happening. Emily was already on social media, sharing nebulous, emotive updates on how betrayal from family hurts the most. She depicted me as the culprit, a cruel daughter assaulting her own mother out of avarice. Sympathetic words for her and our mother poured in. I felt as the story moved online that I was losing control of the circumstances. When I called my attorney, she told me to right away file a police report. I should record everything, he advised, in case my mother chose to intensify things. Though he cautioned me that this would probably completely change the family dynamic even further, I knew it was the appropriate action. I submitted the report after driving directly to the police station. My phone hummed with a message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years as I departed. She told me she had experienced something comparable with her own mother. Illegal loans, identity theft, the works. She stated she believed me and pushed me to be firm. It was enough to keep me going, and the first bit of encouragement I had all day. I urged my friends not to post anything about me on social media, and chose to block my mother and Emily there as well. I wanted room to consider my future moves. I heard a tremendous bang on the door that evening while seated in my apartment. That was my mother. She was demanding that I drop everything, accusing me of separating the family, and yelling loud enough for the entire building to hear. The police answered my call in minutes. They drove her away, and the very next day I sought a restraining order. Though I knew it was important, this was the toughest decision I have ever taken. The extended family kept supporting her and painted me as the villain. Though I felt alone, I stayed with my choice. Soon after, I began therapy in an attempt to organize all that had transpired. As I discussed it, I came to see just how far my mother's deception extended. It was about control, about staying reliant on her, not only on the money. A few days later, my mother's attorney sent me a letter by mail. It was a cease and desist warning, asking that I remove the charges and back off from claiming anything. Though I understood then that this was merely the start of a larger struggle, I was not backing down. 3 days following my submission of the police complaint, my mother's attorney sent a cease and desist letter. It was heavy and full of legal jargon I had to go back over twice to grasp. The letter requested I take back the police complaint, accused me of defamation, and included subtly expressed threats about tarnishing my name should I refuse. They clearly sought to scare me into backing down. I got right on phoning my attorney. He, skimming the letter, advised me not to reply straightforwardly. Rather, he counseled me to compile more proof. If we were to negotiate whatever was ahead, we needed a stronger argument. He advised asking for a copy of any bank records connected to my social security number. Though I knew it would be a tiresome procedure, it was the only way I could determine the whole degree of the damage. I gathered my credit report throughout the following week and called every bank mentioned. What I discovered made my gut turn over. I had never opened credit cards, credit lines, or credit-based loans. The debt was about $100,000 and stretched back almost 10 years. It was worse than I had imagined. This was a practice of financial abuse going on for years beneath my nose, not 1 or 2 loans. I began to see something much more upsetting. Many of the biggest deals mirrored events Emily had boasted about in the past, including her lavish trip to Europe, fancy items she displayed at family get-togethers, and even her wedding expenses. She had obviously gained personally from the money my mother had pilfered under my name. Hoping they would at last see the truth, I attempted getting in touch with a few close cousins. I told what I had discovered, but instead of encouragement, I was greeted with accusations and incredulity. They told me again my mother's story. I was lashing out for no reason, confused, and psychologically unstable. I felt as though I were hammering my skull against a wall. They were so firmly ingrained in her lies that nothing I said would change their perspective. Then I thought back years ago. My mother kept a filing cabinet in her office marked finances. It was always closed, and she kept quiet about it, never allowing anyone close by. I questioned whether my dad remembered the cabinet. He had divorced my mother a few years ago. He did, and I found his response unexpected. Though he had no idea it was this serious, he said he always believed she was acting in a manipulative manner. If we could get access to the house while she was away, he volunteered to assist me in sorting through it. The chance arrived earlier than intended. My dad and I drove to the family house jointly, since my mom had an arranged out-of-town visit with a friend. We located the still-locked cupboard in the basement. We worked at it till we could pry it open. Inside was an evidence goldmine: credit card records, loan applications, bank statements, all signed with my fake signature. On several of the papers, Emily's penmanship included even remarks indicating she had helped complete them. Emily knew, as clear-cut now was, her participation in the deception had been minimal. My mother had planned the whole operation. I photographed everything, and securely kept the paperwork. Later on that evening, I visited Emily at her apartment. I walked her over the proof. She first tried to ignore it, but she broke down when I noted her handwriting. She said she knew about the loans, but she argued her mother had persuaded her it was just for the good of the family. Promising she would pay back the money if I simply stayed silent, she urged me not to go public. I informed her I had finished looking after her. I had everything I could and was headed to the authorities. She begged me, sobbing, but I turned her down. I walked out, leaving her standing there crying. The betrayal I felt in that instant was more profound than anything I had known. I sent my mother a thorough note including all the gathered proof. She had one more opportunity to come clean and right things. I established her reply's deadline. When it came at last, it was precisely what I had anticipated. A long, deceptive text loaded with guilt-tripping charges. She said my dad had brainwashed me into going against her, and I was trying to ruin her life. Just more lies. No apologies or guilt admitted. I resolved I was not going to keep this a secret anymore. On Reddit, I shared screenshots of the sensitively altered documents together with the whole story. The post exploded up overnight. Upon waking, I found hundreds of supportive messages. People acknowledged my doubts, related similar experiences, and urged me on to continue to battle. I had never felt as though I wasn't entirely alone in this. The criticism directed against my mother came fast. Comments calling her out for her conduct inundated her social media page. Emily went private practically right away. Her accounts were attacked also, though the intensity was great. It seemed like justice. Then, as I was beginning to feel some relief, I answered a call from an unidentified number. My mother had hired a private detective. She was going to sue me for emotional harm and slander, he cautioned me. He advised I change my behavior before it was too late. This was clearly far from over. I have to be ready for a full-fledged legal fight. I assumed things would calm down following the court case, but Emily's public apologies turned everything around. Her post became popular practically right away. Admitting her cooperation, she penned a lengthy statement outlining how our mother had mistreated her and clarifying why she had followed along. She felt imprisoned. She detailed how our mother used both of us for years, putting us against one another and underwriting our expenses. Many thousands of people responded, sharing personal tales of familial manipulation and betrayal. Watching was strange, but the help that was flowing in was unbounded. My mother faced a quick and severe backlash. Furious remarks abound on her social media sites. People called her out for her behavior, demanding responses and charging her with fraud. She disabled all of her accounts within several days. The family company she worked for suffered too. Customers started leaving, reluctant to be connected with the bad press. Through the grapevine, I also learned that her business partner, accusing her of mismanagement, was thinking about legal action. The family frayed. Some members insisted that my mother had merely been attempting to be helpful and stayed on my side. They hung to the story of her being a loving mother with a few poor decisions. Others personally contacted me, though, apologizing for not believing me earlier. Being vindicated felt unusual, but it also made one realize how broken the family had gotten. I understood that things would never revert to their former state. Emily asked to meet personally and extended out her reach. I agreed, but I was careful. We met in a little cafe, and she seemed different, exhausted, but also relieved as if a weight had been dropped. She said apologies, this time personally, and it felt more sincere than her internet message. She said she had begun therapy in an attempt to sort through the years of control and manipulation she had been under. She said she wanted a chance to mend our relationship, but she didn't expect me to forgive her straight away. I listened, telling her I valued her honesty even if I didn't guarantee anything. It was only a beginning. Trust would take time. I kept up my own therapy, delving more into the emotional abuse patterns I had experienced as a child. As I dug further, I came to see exactly how much my mother had shaped my life. Therapy let me realize that my lack of perceiving it sooner had nothing to do with me. Though it took time, I began to forgive myself. I got still another letter from my mother's attorney a few weeks later. This time, the offer was a settlement one. It came with strings attached, a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, but also a lot of money. The NDA would forbid me from ever publicly discussing the case or family problems anymore. After some contemplation over several days, I finally decided against it. There was no money worth my silence. I sent the letter to my attorney, and then continued. I lay everything down precisely in a note to the family group chat. I went over the facts I had discovered and explained why I filed legal action. I simply wanted them to know the truth. I didn't seek their pardon or change of opinion. Saying that I had to defend myself even if I was depressed to lose them, I concluded the message. The answers varied. While some texted me encouraging notes, others claimed I broke the family. I ignored it. I knew I had spoken just what I needed to. One of the main news sources picked up my tale around this period. Framed as a case study of confronting familial financial abuse, the reaction was amazing. People who had gone through the same circumstances sent me a flood of letters. Knowing I wasn't alone felt confirming. It provided the closure I had not realized I needed. My father also extended a hand. In recent years, we hadn't really communicated, but he contacted me out of nowhere. He said he was sorry for not recognizing the indications sooner and for not acting when he ought to have. We had a protracted, emotional discussion, and for the first time, it felt like we were on the same page. Though it wasn't a complete reconciliation, it was a decent start. Emily kept on her public apology trip. She conducted interviews providing her side of the story and discussing the deception we both went through. I observed several from a distance. Though it was difficult to watch her thus exposed, it also brought relief. She was assuming accountability, and it exceeded what I had ever seen. Emily and I agreed it was time for a fresh start. Far from the drama, we came upon a little comfortable flat in a new city. Moving day was mixed, but as we sorted through the last of our belongings, I experienced tranquility not felt in years. Then, right as we were closing up, my estranged aunt sent me a package by mail. Inside was a note and a little tarnished locket, a family legacy meant for me by my grandparents. The letter said that although my mother had stashed it, my aunt felt I ought to have it. Holding the locket in my hand, I had an unanticipated thankfulness. On Reddit, I posted one last time updating everyone who had tracked my narrative. I told them about the relocation, expressed my future objectives, and thanked them for their support. People praising me and expressing their pride in me for standing up for myself made the overwhelming response. It marked the ideal finish for this phase of my life. Sunlight pouring through the windows as I sat in our new living room, I looked about at our house. Emily laughed in the kitchen, and for the first time in years, I felt free. I felt I was prepared for this next phase. Sometimes the family you build is better than the one you're born into, I said at closing on my Reddit post. Story 2. For a long while, I considered myself as Joe, an only child, or at least that is what I thought. See, Dean was my older brother once. He disappeared while I was a small child, but this was not your usual missing person scenario. Full of unresolved issues and unusual events, it was the kind that made headlines locally. Dean was to me in those days like a second parent. Mom and Dad put in a lot of overtime, hence he took command. One man that used to visit us rather frequently comes to mind. Dean sent me to my room every single time. He insisted I never ever bring up this guest to our parents. I was a small child, and I followed instructions. I still clearly remember the day before Dean vanished. I suppose I dozed off in the kitchen, fixed on the TV. Dean was chatting to that same guy when I woke up. Their voices were quiet and serious. Just a few words, visit, plan, and city, drifted across to me. Most of it eluded me. Dean looked different the following morning. Nervous, I suppose you could call. Like he was waiting for something. He kept timing himself. He informed me he had to go to the neighbor's house for some, when the hands at last matched the time he had been observing. To be honest, I mumbled, Okay. I was too engrossed in my cartoons to give a damn. He hugged me so big, told me he loved me, then left the door without looking back. Years passed. Growing up, I attended college. Married. Still, Dean's disappearance constantly lurked in the rear of my consciousness. Why should he have left? He went where? Was he merely alive? Then something unusual occurred. Playing on the soccer team in college, After we won a tournament, our photo found print in the neighborhood newspaper and the internet. A few days later, my dorm received a gift basket. It was loaded with my preferred sweets, the kind I used to enjoy as a child. If it came from my parents, I threw the card and dug in. I thanked Mom and Dad later that evening when I called, but they had no understanding what I meant. It dawned on me at that. None, except Dean, knew how much I adored those particular sweets. Hoping for a hint, I hurried outdoors to find the card, but it was long gone. It happened once more a few months later. About Christmas, a blank card bearing just a cheerful face appeared. Nobody in my social network would send something so mysterious or know about my unusual candy fetish. Right. It had to be Dean. After all these years, was he trying to get in touch? The idea both frightened and delighted me. I had questions and sought responses. I needed to find out whether Dean was watching over me out there. Driven to find the truth, I began examining Dean's missing person case. I got cops, investigators, everyone who might know something. It was then that I found the most startling fact. Dean was no longer labeled as missing. The cops informed me years ago my parents had asked his name to be taken off the list. Angry and perplexed, I faced Mom and Dad. Clamped up, my father said nothing at all, but my mother at last cracked. Dean still had life. Years past had seen him discovered, but my parents had renounced him. Because he identified as queer, they assured him I wouldn't want to see him, and I didn't remember him. I felt rage throbbing through me. How would they go about that? Because of their intolerance, Dean had missed my graduation, my wedding, every significant turning point in my life. It was untenable. I found Dean's contact details among the officials. He had supplied it, just in case someone from his family ever tried to get in touch. I hesitated, though. After all these years, after everything, could I confront him? Meg, my wife, observed the conflict I was experiencing. She always knows just what to say and how to mentor me. She urged, "Call him," pulling our son out of the room to allow me time alone. "Chat to your brother." I worked up the bravery over several hours. I probably dialed 7, maybe 8 times before it connected at last, but he ignored it. Starting to back off, I considered maybe it was not the proper moment. Meg would not let me, though. She argued I should keep trying. Still another hour dragged by. I dialed once more, letting it ring twice before hanging up. This time the phone phoned back practically right away. Inside my chest, my heart thumped. My ear was filled with laughter and the sound of fast-flowing wind. The person on the other end sounded to be outside, perhaps close to a window. Then, a voice says, "Hello? Who's this?" It was him, Professor Dean. I picked his voice right away, even after all these years. Emotion surged over me. Amazement, happiness, relief, a strange kind of loss. I froze to speak. Dean asked the question several times before hanging up. I started to dial him back furiously. On the first ring, he responded, I stammered, my voice quivering, then discovered your contact details. "Who are you? What are your wants?" He sounded bewildered. "It's me," I said, my voice just a whisper. Between us was a protracted stillness. I then listened as he instructed someone to turn down the radio and close the window. "What's your name?" he said. He was startled when I mentioned my name. "That's impossible," he remarked, his voice loaded with incredulity. Regarding the missing person case, I described how I came onto his phone number. Gasped he. With an eager voice, "Tell me," he asked, "what color were the shuls I always wore on our picnics?" "Of course, orange," Mom detested the orange laces along with his blue sneakers. Some things you simply never forget, even now all these years. His speech sounded to me almost like tears. "Where are you?" he inquired. He answered, "I'm coming," when I told him. He was on his way precisely like that. He came across the nation to see me after purchasing an airline ticket and packing nothing. Seeing him at the airport was like seeing a somewhat older variation of our father, a robust middle-aged man with gray streaks in his hair. Tears running down our faces, we embraced. I never would have believed feasible a reunion. We caught up, told stories, laughed and wept, hours in a pub close to the airport. He was sorry for all the years missed and for leaving the way he did. I advised him it made no difference. The past was past. He shared with me his life, his lover, a pediatric oncologist, and their 2 girls. He had been living according to the assumption that I loathed him and that I never wanted to see him once more. That destroyed my heart. 6 hours of non-stop talking later, I at last persuaded him to accompany me home. Meg insisted he spend some time with us, and greeted him with wide arms. He bonded with our son practically right away and suited quite perfectly. Dean had always handled children quite well. Those 2 weeks turned into a whirl. My family seemed to have multiplied in count overnight. We all observed Thanksgiving together when Dean's daughters and boyfriend paid us a visit. It was loud and disorderly, yet exactly perfect. I sensed the same. Dean wanted to be nearer to me. I thus began searching for work close by. I finally came onto a fantastic job at a university in his state. We were going to be a family once more at last. By contrast, my parents stayed frigid and aloof. Dean even made a visit, but they shut the door in his face. His eyes revealed terrible damage. I detested them for it. But Dean, with his soft demeanor and compassionate heart, still harbored hope for their return. 6 months have went by since our reunion. Along with a new house and career, most importantly, I have my brother back in my life. Dean's family has thrown wide arms to me. Unlike my own parents, they are encouraging and accepting. Though it has not been without difficulties, life is good. Particularly challenging has been the political environment with its increasing tide of discrimination and intolerance. Our son is bi-raced. Meg is black. Every day they endure prejudice, even from my own parents. Explaining these things to my son tears my heart to see the confusion and hurt in his eyes. My mother calls one day. Though I was slow to respond, curiosity won out. She apologizes for everything, but I told her I wasn't the one she should be apologizing to. Dean is it. Though his happiness was fleeting, he was glad to learn of the apology. She made it plain when he called her that she wanted just to mend her connection with me, not with him. She also recommended conversion therapy. He graciously turned down and hung up, but the talk left him quite damaged. As a counselor, Meg saw Dean showing symptoms of anxiety. She exhorted me to be near him and to be of help. Years of pent-up fury and wrath were released when I phoned my mother back. I explained to her the extent of her damage to Dean and the unforgeability of her behavior. She once more apologized. Nonetheless, I hung up and blocked her number. I couldn't allow her damage my brother any longer. Right now, we are at Dean's house Thanksgiving. The house hums with love and joy. My family, his family, all together. I nearly lost this life. It is the one I always wanted. I will also do all in my ability to safeguard it, shielding my loved ones from the hate and discrimination still present in this planet. I will never let my brother leave, once he taught me the actual meaning of family.